go. You're live.
I'm live. That's good, because otherwise I'd be dead. Which would also be good. Define the relationship. Anyone heard that before?
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Time to have an awkward talk with someone.
To have an awkward talk. And why does that awkward talk happen?
Because people want to know what your intentions and purpose is in relationship with them.
Okay. And what if someone says, well, my intentions are to visit with you and visit with other people? Some people say right on,
Sounds good to me.
and some people say right off. I'm trying to remember who wrote the book. I'm not remembering very well. He said, Why I Stopped Dating the Church. What do you think that title, if we're going to judge a book by its title, what do you think that meant?
That wasn't like not quite as not like quite one more of a commitment than just like dating, like I don't know, something about having more of a commitment than that.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And I suppose something that we find in today's Christendom is probably I'm going to say this number. I didn't take a survey, but based on observations, I would say 90% of Christians date the church. There is no commitment at all. And based on that number, there are a few of us here, and I know we're all, maybe I'm preaching to a choir tonight, because you're all in the discipleship program. So in theory, you're the cream of the crop. Why do people date the church? Why do people not want to commit to it? Dale?
I think it's because they're dating the Lord. I think they're not 100% committed to Him.
So what would that involve, dating the Lord? And I think it's not a big leap to think about human relationships and this relationship. It's a pretty good comparison and metaphor that we can use.
It's their own life is still as important or more important to them than the Lord in many areas. So there's no commitment 100% to the Lord. We all struggle with it. It's a common thing.
Okay, and how, if you were to decide if you are going to up the commitment, you are going to stop dating? Some of you were shocked the other day when Randy was speaking, and oh yeah, I'm supposed to stand in front of the mic. When Randy was speaking and he says, my son got engaged, and all of a sudden there was a few as you sucked the air out of the room and the rest of us started choking. What would make somebody up the ante, so to speak? How would you decide that if it's time, if we're going to define the relationship to take it to the next level, to take it to the next step?
I would say going on and teaching the word to others.
Well, let's just take it in the relationship step.
Like if you
Go
wanna
back to the metaphor.
Like if you want to spend like the rest of your life with somebody.
So how did you figure out that Blair's the one I'm going to spend the rest of my life with? Or your life with, not my life. How did you figure Blair's the one?
I think like I felt like the Lord wanted me to. Felt like the Lord like told me this is the one. that I want you to love. And like,
Were there certain things that made her more attractive than someone else?
yeah, but it's kind of,
It's awkward. I'm not going to say it on live TV. What about you, Cody?
I'm tired of dropping her off every night after dates and stuff. I just want to spend all the time with her. I didn't want to say goodbye and tell her, just wanted to do life with her.
So this hospital and dropping her off at the hospital and waiting in the car is just,
I don't mind that.
you don't mind that?
I don't like being
Okay, what about you, Tim? This is all random on the spot things. They've had no idea.
God has lots of prayer goals before engaging in the relationship throughout. So develop this kind of, like we said, just I can't see myself not spending this.
A friend of mine told me a long time ago when I was still single, he said two things. He said, you always sort of got to start with the first words of the Bible, in the beginning, God. And he said, that's where it all starts, with God. But then he said this other thing that's probably hit me more. He says, well, I just couldn't live without her. Because if I could live without her, I could live without her. And because I couldn't live without her, I decided to ask her to be my wife. And I thought, oh, that sounds pretty good advice. Now, what about the church? Why do so many people think they can live without the church?
because the rest of the world does it.
Because everyone else does it?
Maybe it's because the church they've been presented with is only ever presented as something to be recreationally consumed rather than something to be served.
I would like to say something about Connie, about Connie. One day Connie was giving to Allison a lesson for client, rock climbing music. And was a time when we finished. And Connie said something like, I always think about this, and it's good. He says, always is over, it's done. But he looks a little bit like anxious, a little bit like it's time, right? And I wonder why. And he says, I would like to go and say good night to my kids and give a kiss before they go to bed, right? And that showed me the relationship he has with someone, with the little ones, too close. And he's gonna do whatever he can do, right, to be there and to improve and maintain the relationship for love, because he loved them. And that made me think about how much we love the Lord and the brothers and sisters. We're gonna put effort in our lives to be with them, to edify to one another. And yeah, I think that example is by love, we serve the Lord. We love to one another.
And that's a pretty good sign for a commitment, isn't it? That our love for that person or those people usually will influence. John wrote in 1 John, and he said, well, if you don't love the brethren. Now, if that were the criteria, it's not the criteria, but if that were the criteria for getting in heaven, then 90% of people don't really like the people that they're at church with. That's not a good thing, is it? Because you don't have to like the people that you're at church with, but you have to love them. And as Cody was talking in one of his talks earlier this summer, he was talking about love is a decision. It's a choice that we consciously make outside of our feeling. And he told this story of how it persevered one time when Kendra was having a little bit of depression in her life. And she said, I don't love you. But he said, I still love you. And he knew that it wasn't her really talking, it was the medications that were in her mind. And it was a firm commitment in his mind that this is the person I made a choice with several years ago, and my decision has not changed. Now, the church is something that you and I need and ought to love to be with. It's not always a happy thing. We love our families, but sometimes people in our families do things that we might say upset us. They rub us the wrong way. Most of you don't know this, but most of you probably do know. Allison's blind. So she has this talking telephone, and it talks at like 1,000 words a minute. But she always has the volume up so she can hear the blah, 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 because blind people can apparently hear faster than sighted people. And it drives me absolutely nuts. There's no rest, there's no peace, there's no concentration because you hear this blah, blah, and it distracts you when you're sitting there reading. If it was just a constant murmur, you could get away with that. But it drives me nuts. But it's still something that exists. And although I find it uncomfortable and annoying, we still love her. We can't love her anymore because she has that disgusting telephone. That wouldn't make any sense, would it? And so in the church, there might be things that, actually, let's read a verse first. Let's read in Hebrews chapter 10. There's a well-known verse in chapter 10 and verse 25 that says, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as we see the day approaching. Anybody ever heard that verse before? What does that mean? It means don't forsake the gatherings of yourselves together. It's pretty easy. But why? What's the context of verse 25? What does verse 24 say?
Consider one another in order to stir up love and good works.
Consider one another. So what does consider mean? Think about them, contemplate them, have them on your mind. Consider them to provoke is what my Bible says. Josh read stir up. Provoke means almost to force, doesn't it? So I often tell the story of how my dad was an idiot, and in a good sense of the word. And he thought that somehow if you put 3 boys in the back seat of his car and go on an 8-hour drive, that we wouldn't fight. And he'd do that over and over again. And we get to like the first stop sign, and he said, well, I have to turn around and stop the car. And then we usually didn't make it to the next stop sign. And then we'd behave ourselves for probably 15 minutes, and then we just couldn't stand the silence anymore. And then I'd put my finger like this far away from my brother's forehead. And he would say, Dad, Trevor's touching me. And I'd say, no, I'm not. I'm like an inch away. Because literally I wasn't. But sooner or later, he'd slap my hand because it was right between his eyes, and the fight was on. I was provoking. He had no other option, did he, than to fight. Here it says to provoke somebody to love and good works. To make it so there's absolutely zero option for them except to love and do good works. Now, how do you do that if you're all by yourself? Because that's verse 25, so don't forsake the gathering of yourselves together, comes right on the heels of verse 24. How's anybody supposed to love you if you're never there? So if I never went to Mexico, do you think I would love Leo? No. If I never met her, how am I going to love her? Does that make sense? If Daniel never went to Ghana, how would he ever love his wife? He would have never met her. Priscilla would be, I don't know anybody else in the world named Priscilla other than her. I don't think. But you know what I mean. So if you're never there, or they're never there, how are you going to provoke one another to love, to good works, to almost force them to have no other option if you've never met them? Does that sound logical? Now, in the assembly, well, we could start out with Christ loved the church. So if Christ loves something, should you love something? So Allison likes cats. I'm not a cat lover. Mostly because I'm allergic to cats, I suppose, and I get these red welts and my eyes turn red and swell up and tears, and I start sneezing uncontrollably, and I start itching and scratching. And I think that's a pretty good reason to avoid cats. But Allison, on the other hand, loves cats. Now, one day, she says, "Dad, can I have a cat?" Because there was this stray cat. And I said, "No." But for like a week, she kept, there's this little cat. Okay. And in my mind, my commitment was like to buy food. Okay, I'm going to spend like $10 a month. That's how much food can a cat eat? And that was my commitment. Well, as soon as I said yes, she had her scissors. She had a cardboard box. She was cutting a hole in it. She was putting a towel inside. She was making like this palace for the cat. She had a bowl of milk, and she had, you see, Allison was all in. I wasn't all in. I was sort of, I'll buy the food. Is that really commitment? I'll buy the food. And in the church, we're not supposed to have I'll bring the fruit salad. I'll be the one who dresses nice. I'll play the guitar. It's not that sort of attitude. It's an attitude of we're all in. This is something Christ loved. And because he loved it, I'm going to love it. Because there must be something extra special in this entity that I'm not quite seeing yet. But if I could see it through the Lord's eyes, it's going to be spectacular. It's going to be so splendid that I will never, ever take my eyes off of it. And so that's one of the reasons that you and I want to be with the people of God. To provoke them to love, because we have this huge commitment to them, because Christ has this huge commitment to them. In my relationship with Leo, and there's various degrees, but in our family, she's the evangelist. You may have noticed that. And I'm the teacher. And it sort of works out pretty well, because I would have nobody to teach her. She didn't have anybody to evangelize. And it's a complementary completion type thing, that everything is there. And in the assembly, and so she takes advantage that she can witness to people, and then I will disciple people, and I take advantage that she's seeing people saved, and then I can work with them. And because of that, there's, do you see that taking advantage in a good way? Now, in the assembly, God's given us all gifts. Each and every one of us have spiritual gifts. And because of that, you and I are asked by the Lord to be used and to use other people in a good way and take advantage, and they can take advantage of the spiritual gifts that are there. Do you sort of, are you following that? If there's something that I take advantage of Leo's good cooking. And so we have lots of hospitality in our house. The seamstress, she also takes advantage of Leo's good cooking, because she has lots of work getting me bigger clothes. The grocer takes advantage. And people in the community would take advantage of that in a good sense, because something good is going on. Now, in the assembly, we'll ask those two questions. Do you take advantage of the gifts in your assembly? And in a good sense, because there is a bad sense people take advantage of. Oh, you're selling your car? I'm a Christian too, you know. You know, you should knock off a few more $1,000 because I'm a Christian. Now, that's one I never, ever understood at all. Sell it to me cheaper because I'm a Christian. Doesn't that person pay tithes on his money too? And sometimes I think that's sort of the bad way to take advantage of the Christians. And we sort of suck things out of them for our benefit. But when Paul writes to the Romans, and he talks about it being a mutual benefit, doesn't it? A mutual blessing one to another. And in the assembly, when we take advantage of people's gifts, we use those things. Some people aren't very good administrators. Other people are. And so I told the story the other night how we take advantage of Alex. Because if we need things done, Alex has this gift of just, here it is. Like 5 minutes later, it's taken like 3 weeks to get it to her. And then she gets it, and in like 5 minutes, it's done. It's awesome. And that's her gift. She administrates like hardly anybody else I know. She just and it's done in an hour. Other people have gifts for being nice. I don't know if that's really a spiritual gift, but there are some people that are just a whole lot nicer than other people. People prefer to talk to with Leo than with me, just because she's a whole lot nicer. People prefer to talk with Allison more than me because she's just nicer. Cody, he has a gift of encouragement. And he encourages people. And so they're doing their activities, and he says, well, just reach, Allison's learning how to rock climb, just reach a little bit higher to your right. And she's feeling away, and I close my eyes because I'm pretending I'm blind and I can't see. No, a little bit higher. Stand on your toes a little bit. Do that hip thrust thing. I can't remember what he called it, but you're supposed to put your hips in closer to the wall. And because your hips are closer into the wall, you get rid of that little angle there and you can get a little higher. There you go. You got it. And that's one of his gifts. And we're taking advantage of it. To the good sense. You're taking advantage of something Josh set up, and Tim set up, and Cody set up, and I'm taking advantage of it too. And you're taking advantage of being able to learn all these Bible classes and what it means this year to be a disciple and what it involves. And it involves using the church in its good sense. Because there are things there that you will never find anywhere else. And there are people there that you won't find anywhere else. And if they're willing to be used, and if you're willing to be used for the Lord, you're going to be such a blessing to them. It's a privilege to be in the church. But sometimes we don't think of it quite like that. But with privilege comes responsibility. That big, bad, grown-up word. And there are things that we need to be responsible for. But that won't come until we have the commitment. And so, which comes first? And I was going to say the chicken or the egg, but we know the chicken came first. Taking advantage and using the church and being responsible. Because it's such a privilege to be there. So, being at prayer meeting, is that an important thing? It's a privilege to be there. You get to be with everybody else right before the throne of God. And there's some extra promises thrown in when 2 or 3 agree. So now what, with that privilege of prayer, what's the responsibility? To pray. So in some meetings, it's a very strange prayer meeting. It's almost like a silent prayer meeting. And in other meetings, it's like, why doesn't anybody ever shut up? And I say that in the sense that because women keep a silent voice, if we don't let silence times be in the prayer meeting, when do they pray? Are they just repeating what we're saying? That's it? That's part of our responsibility, isn't it? Remembering the Lord is a great privilege. We have the privilege of knowing the Lord. So what's our responsibility that goes with that? To remember him. Just like he asked us to. We don't tell testimonies. We don't start Bible teaching We don't have a sing-along. We remember the Lord. So we have the privilege of having the gospel. What's our responsibility with that?
Share it.
To share the gospel. And the gospel just doesn't go out to unconverted sinners, does it? That's not the only power in the gospel. It's a gospel that transforms your life and my life even today, isn't it? We talked about the commitment. And I don't want to be committed because I still want to have freedom. Well, you don't really have freedom. You think you do, but you're trapped in that way of life and you don't want to make the decision. So you're not free to make that commitment according to your mind. But when the Son sets you free, you're really free. Sometimes we have sins that seem to occur over and over again, and we just can't get rid of it. And then we're reading there in John chapter 8, and look at this. We get freedom from the gospel. Just can't give up that drinking habit. You think you're the only one in the assembly? Well, that hasn't had a drinking problem? I'm going to guess probably not. And there's somebody there that can help guide you through. And you take advantage of their experience and you bring it into your life and they help set you free because the Son set them free. And so there's so many privileges that you and I have, and that gives us these responsibilities that we have. This is the importance of the assembly. The importance for being able to be together, to worship together, to learn together, to encourage together, to love together. The great things that the assembly does. And I forgot to read Ephesians, so we better read it before I close, because let's read in Ephesians chapter 4. There are two words I want us to notice. I want us to notice the words one, or things that mean one, and all. Because in general, those two things are opposite. But in this passage, they come to mean and create a great picture for you and I. I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that you walk worthy of the vocation where you were called, with all loneliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, even as ye are called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God, and the Father of all, who is above all, and through all, and in you all. But unto every one of us is given grace according to the measure of the gift of Christ. Wherefore he saith, when he ascended up on high, he led captivity captive, he gave gifts to men. Now that he ascended, what is it that he also descended first to the lower parts of the earth? That he descended is the same also that ascended far above all heavens, that he might fill all things. And he gave to some apostles, and some prophets, and some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers, for the perfecting, the completing of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ, till we all come in the unity of the faith, and of the knowledge of the Son of God unto the perfect man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, that we henceforth be no more children tossed to and fro, and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men and the cunning craftiness whereby they lie in wait to deceive, but speaking the truth in love, may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ, from whom the whole body fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplieth according to the effectual working of the measure of every part, making increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love. What does edifying mean? Build. The church is supposed to be able to build itself up in love. The assembly is a very important thing in the eyes of God. It should be a very important thing in our lives. And if we were to define our relationship, it should have a stamp on it that says, I'm committed to the church. Any questions or comments?
This portion remind me, one day we were in Tijuana, I don't know if you remember, but we have a Bible study with the ladies, and we decided to go on the little mountain there, and then very high, but was a little bit, how do you say deep? No.
Steep.
Steep. And later, one of the sisters, the more stronger, the more fitness, I would say, doing that exercise, she saw some of us more behind, but everybody need to be there, have to be there. And she helped us, one another, to be there, right? And I was watching her. She was tired. She looked tired, but she put a lot of effort to help the weakness, right? And that the Lord put in my heart is how important it is for us to edify the truth, to encourage to one another. The strong in faith can help the
Weaker?
And sometimes we can forget this, that we are one body in Christ and we need to one another. And always I try to say to the young people when I give a Bible studies to young people there, because our purpose in this life to be at the Church of Christ is not destroy to one another, but edify. Try to edify, to help your brother. If you see them behind in something, try to encourage, and try to see what is happening. And to edify to one another. I think it's very important.
Yeah, I think I have to be like, if I need help, then I have to be willing to receive that help too.
Mm-hmm.
It's not gonna help me if I'm not willing.
And sometimes that happens, doesn't it? Can I help you with this? No way, Jose. I can do it by myself.
Just add one thing too, if we're not willing to stir one another up to good works and look for the gifts in other people, usually a lot of times it'd be the elders looking for the gifts in the young people. And those gifts, either they're not gonna grow, or they're gonna grow somewhere else probably. And so, I mean, I'm really encouraged that somebody senior in our church was paying attention to me, and then somebody was paying attention to Sean, and so the next generation look for the gifts, because we all have them, and we think that, I pick on Josh Rowe, but you know, he's still considered a young person, but the young people in the church have greatly affected the church. And then I also just I love that verse where it says, when each part is working properly. So not just working, but working properly. The evangelists and the shepherds and the pastors and all that working properly, then the church grows. Just like you and Leo, she's doing her part, you're doing your part, and it grows. So anyway, just a couple more comments.
So love your church. Let's just, I think we can break off into groups of 3. We have like 8 minutes or something like that, according to that watch. I know that's not official. Our official time is we do have 8 or 9 minutes. So let's just quickly break off into groups of 2 or 3 and spend some time in prayer before we have our last 14 hours with the children